My first laboratory job. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Input English. Today I'd like to share with you what it was like beginning my first job in a laboratory, a real job. My undergraduate studies at the university included a lot of time in laboratories. The laboratories for chemistry, biology, physics. These laboratories were for the purpose of teaching us principles during our undergraduate studies. The laboratories were not designed to discover new knowledge. No, they were designed to impart knowledge upon the students. And so we knew we were not there as researchers, we were there as undergraduate college students. So my first job working in a research laboratory was a very fun, interesting experience. It was in the summer. My first laboratory job was as a research assistant in a laboratory run by the US federal government. I was assigned as an assistant to work with a PhD principal investigator named Michael. Michael had a PhD in microbiology, and he would be best described as a bacteriologist. He was an expert on bacteria. This was very natural for me because my undergraduate studies were in microbiology, so I thought I had a pretty good understanding of microbiology. Well, my months of working with Michael in his research lab taught me a great deal more. And one of the things that it taught me is that I didn't know much about microbiology. But Michael did. It was a great experience. When I got there, I was very green. That is a term of art that you commonly hear in American English. If somebody is very green, they are new. They don't know anything. So I was very green, and he knew it. So he brought me into the lab, and he said, "What's the first thing you do when you come to work in a new laboratory?" And I didn't have an answer. I don't know. I was thinking, get a lab coat, find a place to put your lunch. I don't know. And, in fairness to me, he was really playing a game that's frequently played in academics. The game is called, "What am I thinking?" And the trouble with somebody playing "What am I thinking?" is the participant can't win because you have no idea what the other person is thinking. So Michael said, "So what's the first thing you do when you get to a new laboratory?" And the answer he wanted me to come up with, I didn't know. But what he said was, look through all the drawers, look in all the cabinets, find out what's here, where it's kept, and get familiar with your territory. Take stock of what's in this new laboratory. Well, that was a valuable bit of information. He then walked me around his laboratory and showed me where everything was kept. So when I needed Petri plates or slants or pipettes or any number of other things, I already knew where they were because he showed me. Ever since that day, I have a habit. If I get into a new laboratory or a new workspace, a new place to do work, the first thing I want to do is go through all the drawers and cabinets and find out what's there. And I learned that from Michael. I had learned a great deal about laboratory technique, related to bacteriology. He had taught me every day as much as he could, and what he found in me was a young guy who was very curious. I was very receptive to all the information that he was willing to pass on to me. About halfway through that summer of working as a research assistant, a large box arrived, a very large box. And he called me in and pointed to it and said, "I got a new job for you." "What's up?" I said. He said, "Well, it's a peculiarity of this organization. A couple of years ago, they had money left in the budget that they needed to spend, but they were not allowed to buy a large piece of equipment because the budgetary process requires that to go through approval as capital equipment. So if you are buying paper towels, that's just supplies, and putting that order in, no problem. But if you're trying to buy an incubator or a refrigerator or a microscope, some sort of big expensive equipment, that had to go through a budgetary process called capital equipment cycle. That is, the process occurred every year, and you would put in your request, and it might be approved or it might be denied, depending. So in years past, they had plenty of money in the budget. They wanted a microscope, but they couldn't get it through capital equipment. So the supply guy said, "No problem. I'm not going to order a microscope. I'm going to order microscope parts. And they'll come in, and you guys get to put it together." That's exactly what happened. The supply person put in the requisition, used the money in the budget, and bought the appropriate parts from a long list of parts that go into a microscope. The researcher had wanted a phase contrast microscope that allowed the laboratory personnel to see bacteria without killing them and putting stain on them. They wanted to be able to see them in their live state in liquid. So they wanted a phase contrast microscope. That is the list of parts they bought. And that's what was in the box. So Michael just tasked me with getting everything out of the box, going down the list, reading the literature, and assembling the microscope, and that's what I did. Every day, I would come in and put in the next part, and eventually the microscope was completely assembled. I didn't have any parts left over. There were no extras. It was complete. The list was correct. There was nothing missing. No, it was great. But it wasn't ready to be used because it had not been properly aligned and calibrated. It needed adjustments. But the manual that came with it explained exactly how to do this. This was long before the internet, so in the modern era, it would be very simple to get that information. You'd go online, you'd maybe read a PDF or watch a video on how to do something, and boom, you're done. But this was a number of years ago, and so I had to read the manual and adjust the microscope. By golly, it worked. And we used that microscope in the laboratory. It was fascinating to be able to see bacteria without having to stain them with dye to make the contrast. We just used the natural contrast that occurs because the bacteria have a different refractive index compared to the water. This was not the last time I ever worked with a phase microscope. No, these are fascinating. We're going to talk about phase microscopy in the future at least once, because I have a phase microscope, and I'm going to show you some pictures that we make with phase microscopy. So that was a brief description of my first real job as a research assistant. Basically, I worked helping a bacteriologist in a research laboratory. During that process, he gave me far more knowledge than I deserved. And then at the end, I had the joy of assembling a microscope and having it work properly. So I hope you enjoyed this story, and I invite you to join us in future episodes. See you soon.